most old European folk tales are seriously messed up by today's standards, and Hansel and Gretel is no exception. The original story has it all: cannibalism, child murder, witchcraft. Basically, nightmare fuel disguised as a bedtime story, which raises a fair question. Why the hell would anyone tell that to children? Well, the answer's just as insane. Back when this story was written, things like cannibalism, child death, and witch hunts weren't exactly rare. Sounds unbelievable, but in medieval Germany, people were literally eating their kids and burning thousands alive in bloody witch hunts. It was chaos, the kind of era people prefer to pretend never happened. And the wildest part, Hansel and Gretel actually hides a very real, very violent story behind all the fantasy. We'll get to that in a bit. But first, let's talk about the Brothers Grimm. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm were German scholars who made it their mission to collect and preserve local folklore. During their youth, Napoleon invaded Germany and tore the country apart. The brothers saw that as a threat to German culture, so they decided to save as much of it as they could, one fairy tale at a time. And no, their stories weren't meant for kids. They wrote them for academics, which explains why they didn't shy away from violence, gore, or horror. The brothers spent their lives gathering tales from towns and villages across Germany. Among the hundreds they found was Hansel and Gretel. They first heard it from a woman named Dorothea Wilde, who later married Wilhelm. Over time, the Grimms kept editing the story, tweaking the motivations, imagery, and even the moral messages to make them a bit more Christian. But the skeleton of the story stayed the same, and that's what lets us trace it back to the dark events that inspired it. Over the centuries, dozens, maybe hundreds, of versions of Hansel and Gretel have circulated. But to keep us all on the same page, here's a quick recap of the Grimm version, the one they actually published. You probably know most of it, but trust me, there are details in this one that might surprise you. A poor family in Germany is starving. The mother convinces the father to abandon their two kids deep in the forest. Her logic? It's better they die quickly than starve slowly. The father reluctantly agrees, but Hansel overhears everything. The next morning, the parents lead Hansel and Gretel into the woods. On the way, Hansel secretly drops white pebbles to mark the trail. The parents tell the kids to rest by the fire and vanish. When night falls, Hansel and Gretel follow the pebbles back home. Their father's overjoyed. Their mother, furious. Soon, the food runs out again. The mother orders another walk into the woods. This time, Hansel tries breadcrumbs instead of pebbles, but birds eat them. The kids are lost for days until they stumble upon a strange house made of bread and cake. Desperate, they start eating it. Then an old woman appears and invites them inside. She feeds them sweets until they pass out, and then reveals she's a witch. The candy house was bait. She locks Hansel in a cage, forces Gretel to cook and clean, and begins fattening up the boy for dinner. But before she can eat him, Gretel tricks her into checking the oven and shoves her inside. The witch burns alive, screaming, as the kids steal her jewels and escape. They eventually make it home, give the treasure to their father, and live comfortably. The mother, conveniently, dies while they're gone. The story's darkest parts, child abandonment and cannibalism, are horrifying, but they're also historically grounded. In the early 1300s, Europe went through an agricultural boom. Food was plentiful, people had more children, and populations exploded. But in 1315, a mini ice age hit. Torrential rain ruined crops, and famine spread across the continent. Prices for essentials like grain, salt, and wheat skyrocketed. And even if you could find food, most couldn't afford it. Millions starved. Desperate families did unthinkable things to survive, including, yes, abandoning their children. So Hansel and Gretel wasn't born from imagination. It was a reflection, a brutal mirror of real desperation. During the Great Famine, families knew their children were doomed to starve. By abandoning them, there was at least a slim chance they might survive, or at the very least, die more mercifully. But there was another, much darker option too. In Hansel and Gretel, the witch is obsessed with eating children. And as disturbing as that sounds, real people during the famine sometimes resorted to cannibalism. It was that desperate. For many, the choice came down to two options: sacrifice one child or let the entire family die. Some didn't hesitate to decide. The Grimms recorded Hansel and Gretel in the 1800s, but it likely originated centuries earlier, sometime after the famine of the 1300s. Those real, horrifying events almost certainly shaped the story. As with all folk tales, every retelling layered on new elements over time. Witches, like the one in Hansel and Gretel, are a common symbol across global folklore. But in medieval Germany, witches weren't just characters in stories. They were scapegoats. After the Great Famine, the region was desperate for someone to blame. Crop failures, death, starvation, all needed an explanation. In a deeply religious society, witches became the perfect target. Politicians used the hysteria to dodge accountability and keep power, while the working class finally had someone to hate. The witch hunts that followed were brutal. If a woman was old, single, or simply odd, that was enough to call her a witch. Once accused, not convicted, just accused, she could be tortured and imprisoned. Thousands were burned alive. In southwestern Germany alone, roughly 3,200 people were executed for witchcraft. Whole villages were wiped out in the name of purification. Men, women, even children were killed. A 90-year-old priest was executed. Around 50 kids under 12 were put to death. It got so insane that politicians started accusing each other of witchcraft just to gain power. So it's no mystery why so many German folktales, including Hansel and Gretel, revolve around killing witches. It was a cultural obsession, a reflection of what people were living through. In later versions of the story, the mother became a stepmother. The evil stepmother trope shows up constantly in European folklore, especially in Grimm tales. Nobody knows exactly why. Some think the Grimms wanted to protect the image of motherhood from being too dark. But since their audience wasn't children, that's unlikely. More realistically, the change came from social reality. Women often died in childbirth, so stepmothers were far more common. In stories, the evil stepmother served as a contrast to the ideal mother, cold, selfish, and cruel instead of loving and nurturing. Interestingly, in Hansel and Gretel, the mother, or stepmother, dies right when the witch is killed. A plot twist-worthy theory suggests they're actually the same person, symbolically or psychologically. More likely, though, they just represent two forms of the same evil, and the death of both marks a return to safety under the father's protection. There's nothing particularly unique about Hansel and Gretel itself. It's hard to tell whether it inspired other European stories, or if it simply absorbed pieces from older ones. Its DNA is everywhere. In the Italian tale Nino e Nella, a stepmother abandons her children in the forest, and the father leaves a trail of oats, only for a donkey to eat them. In the French story Petit Poucet, or Little Thumb, Children are again abandoned and captured by an ogre who plans to eat them, but the kids trick him into killing his own daughters instead. There's even Fées François, where a young girl decapitates an ogre's wife after pushing the ogre into an oven. These stories all echo each other: lost children, evil parents, cannibalistic monsters, miraculous escapes. Dozens of them exist across Europe, sharing the same haunting themes. So, no, Hansel and Gretel isn't a true story. Not exactly. But it does reveal real truths about the world that created it. A world defined by famine, fear, superstition, and survival. Ugly truths, maybe, but fascinating ones.